guys, how are you doing? It is the last week of class, and so remember that assignment number 9 and assignment number 10 are due on Thursday night. If you want to send to me any versions of those assignments so that I can take a look beforehand and I'll give you guys some feedback, please feel free to do that. Or if you have questions about anything from those assignments, just let me know, okay? Get in touch with me. So this is our last lecture, yay! And the last lecture is going to be on embedded clauses. So last time we were talking about the structure of main clauses, and we said that every sentence in English has the same basic structure. It's always a sentence divided into a subject, which is a noun phrase, and a predicate, which is a verb phrase. So we're going to see that that will always be true, regardless of whether you have a main clause or an embedded clause. So embedded clauses are going to have identical structure to main clauses. But what is special about embedded clauses is that they are clauses that occur within other clauses. So that's what it means to be an embedded clause. So you can think of the main clause as being the whole clause when you have a sentence, and an embedded clause would be a sentence within that sentence. So we talked about the idea that in English you can have phrases that occur within phrases. So within a noun phrase, you can have, for example, a prepositional phrase. And that prepositional phrase may include a noun phrase. And that noun phrase may include an adjective phrase. So this is the property of recursion in grammar. And what we need to do is to account for how that is possible by looking at particular structures where we have this embedding feature. So we're going to talk about it with respect to embedded clauses. Whenever you have a sentence that is occurring within another sentence, then we have an embedded clause. So we are going to see that we have 3 types of embedded clauses in English. Actually, we have much more than this, but this is what we're going to cover in this semester. So if you're interested in knowing about the other types, then you need to continue taking linguistics classes. Actually, there's a lot more than this, but we have that we're going to talk about embedded clauses that can serve as the complement to the main verb. So what does that mean? Typically, the main verb in English, we know, appears with, let's say, a direct object. I saw the shoes. The shoes is the direct object of saw. So what happens if instead of having shoes there as the direct object, we put a whole different sentence? So for example, if you said, I said Mary is nice. In that example, Mary is nice is its own sentence. So it's going to be comprised of the same parts that a sentence is always comprised of: the subject, noun phrase, and the predicate, verb phrase. So that is going to be identical, the embedded clause, to the main clause, and then within the embedded clause, we're going to look at how to provide it as a complement of that verb. I said Mary is nice. You want said to be the verb group, and Mary is nice to be the complement of that verb. Okay, so we're going to go through this in a lot of detail and give you an overview so that you know where it is that we're going. And we also see that in English it is possible to have embedded clauses serving as the complement to an adjective. So if you say something like, I am worried that Mary is not feeling well, that Mary is not feeling well is the embedded clause. It's its own sentence within a larger sentence. And worried is the item that is taking that as its complement. And worried, in this example, is serving as an adjective, which you can see because you could say something like, I am very worried that Mary is not feeling well. So worried as an adjective also has the capacity to take a complement, which is a clause. And we'll look at what those structures are going to look like. It's going to look very similar to the structures where you have the complement to a main verb. Okay, the third structures that we're going to look at with embedded clauses are what we call subject clauses. So what is that? That's when you have a whole sentence that is occurring within the subject position of another sentence. Of course, the other sentence is the main clause. So for example, if you have a sentence like, that Mary was kind was well known by everybody. That Mary was kind was well known by everybody. that Mary was kind is sitting in the subject position of that sentence. It's the item that is the topic of the sentence. So we want to say that that's going to be under the noun phrase that we know is the first division of the sentence, and then the predicate of the sentence is going to be whatever follows that. So we need to think about how can we put these items that we think of as being sentences, clauses, into the subject position. Whereas in the other examples of embedded clauses, we have embedded clauses occurring as complement to a verb or complement to an adjective. So we will go over those structures, as I say, one by one, and let's start with, probably this is the most common type of embedded clause, and so you're going to see this one the most frequently, which is the main verb complement. So, main verb complement clause. How do you know when you have an embedded clause? You know because you can see that within your sentence is another sentence. So for example, if you have a sentence like, John said Phyllis left the room. Okay, so you have the sentence, John said Phyllis left the room. And you're thinking about what is going on in this sentence in terms of its basic breakdown into subject and predicate. So looking at the whole sentence, looking at the main clause, in other words, what is going to be the main clause? Always, all of the information in the whole sentence. So it's always the main clause. And we'll just identify it here. Main clause. So John said Phyllis left the room. That's the whole sentence. And when we think about what is going on with this clause in terms of subject and predicate, we could think that the subject of this sentence is John, right? He's the one doing the saying. And then what does he say? Said Phyllis left the room. So this whole thing seems to be the predicate of the sentence. So it would be as if you had John said hello. Hello would be the complement of the verb said, and that would be the complete sentence. So John is going to be the noun phrase subject of this whole clause, of this whole main clause. But notice that within this, we have another clause, because we have this, Phyllis left the room. And so if we focus on this part of the sentence, Phyllis left the room, we know that this is another clause. Why? Because we could have just said that as a main clause. We could have used that as an independent sentence. So in English you can say, Phyllis left the room. Whenever you can have a sentence occurring on its own as an independent sentence, then you know you have a clause. And then whether that's embedded or not determines the structure that you're going to have. Okay, so in other words, all sentences are main clauses, and then some sentences, what we're seeing here, are sentences that occur within main clauses. So these are what we're going to call embedded clauses. So notice what's going on here. John said Phyllis left the room. Phyllis left the room. Why are we defining this as a sentence? Well, it can occur by itself. Phyllis left the room. And it's comprised of the two things that we know we have to have when we have a sentence, which are subject and predicate. So if you look just at Phyllis left the room, Phyllis would be your subject, and your predicate would be left the room. And you could think about all of the different ways that we've analyzed sentences in terms of, okay, what's the verb phrase? So the verb phrase here would be left the room. What is the material in the verb group? That would just be the verb left. What information do we have about that? Just that it's past tense, right? There's no auxiliary verbs there. So this would be the verb group labeled as past tense. The room is serving as a direct object of left, and it's a noun phrase, so in the structure we would have noun phrase. And then the verb phrase would be comprised of left and the room, and then Phyllis is the noun phrase together forming a sentence with that predicate. So an embedded clause is exactly the same as any other type of clause. There's nothing that is different about an embedded clause structure. The only thing that is different about an embedded clause is that it's inside another clause, okay? But it follows all the rules and generalizations that we have claimed hold for clauses in general. So the verb said seems to be the type of verb that will allow embedded clauses. Now that's not going to be true for every single verb, right? Because if you say, John hit the wall. John hit the wall. Here, the wall is serving as the direct object of the verb hit, and it's a noun phrase, so we know that it can be a direct object. And in the structure, the verb group hit will be taking the noun phrase the wall as its direct complement, and it will be monotransitive, right? So imagine if we wanted to change this so that we have an embedded clause here. So instead of John hit the wall, you have John hit, and then you bring this clause from over here, Phyllis left the room. So John hit, Phyllis left the room. Why does that not sound like a sentence of English? Why is it not possible to say that? Because we know that hit is the type of verb that can have something following it. We know it's the type of verb that can have a complement. However, this particular type of complement, in other words, a sentence itself, hearing again, is not possible with a verb like hit. So we're going to put an unacceptable mark here for John hit, Phyllis left the room. So which verbs do you think are going to be the type of verbs that will allow embedded clauses? They're going to be the type of verbs that have to do with speaking or saying, and also the type of verbs that have to do with mental states. So for example, if you say, John thought Mary was nice, that's an acceptable construction because you're referring to the mental state of thinking. John wondered whether Mary would come to the party. John asked if Mary was nice, right? So all of these verbs that have to do with your mental state, a thought that you can have, are going to be of the appropriate sort semantically to allow for an embedded clause. So let's see what the structure is going to be. If you have Mary said John was nice. Okay, so this is going to be the most simple, right, the most basic type of embedded clause. Why? Because you can easily identify that John was nice is the complete embedded clause. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about examples where we have material other than just the embedded clause. But here we have just the embedded clause, John was nice. So first thing we do in looking at this, Mary said John was nice, you want to identify the main clause, which of course is always the whole sentence. Largest, think of it as being the largest sentence there. The sentence that includes everything else. So this is our main clause. And it's going to have the structure that we know we have for every single clause. In other words, noun, place, subject, verb, phrase, predicate. And then when we look within this, we say Mary said John was nice. Aha! We see John was nice can occur as its own sentence. So John was nice itself looks like a sentence. So we want to mark John was nice as an embedded clause. It's a sentence that occurs within Mary said John was nice, right? It's a part of that sentence. So that's what makes it an embedded clause as opposed to being a main clause. So what do we want to do in order to provide the structure for embedded clauses? We want to do exactly what we've been doing so far with clauses in general, and we're just going to extend that structure to looking at embedded clauses. In other words, when you have an embedded clause, just forget that it's an embedded clause. Just completely erase out the rest of the material in the sentence and look at that as a sentence, as a clause. So when you have the sentence, John was nice, what would the structure for that be? Well, it's going to be the sentence comprised of the noun, phrase, subject, John, and then the predicate was nice. So that would be straightforward, and that's exactly what you want to do when you're looking at embedded clauses in general. Just pretend that they are not embedded clauses because their structure is no different than any other clause.
So analyze them as if they were just standing by themselves. So you have the structure for John was nice. And remember, at this point, we're not thinking about what's going on internally within the verb phrase, within the verb group. You just have to think about what is falling within the subject position and what is falling within the predicate position. That's the important thing right now. So then we come back and we say, John was nice is the thing that was said, right? And that's why we're saying that main verb complement clauses are this type. In other words, what did Mary say? She said John was nice. So John was nice is serving as taking the action of the verb said. So what do we know we have here as our main verb group is the verb said, and then we want to create a predicate with John was nice serving as the complement to that verb group. So that's our verb phrase, and of course we know Mary is the subject of the main clause, and the main clause is functioning exactly like every other clause in the sense that it's comprised of a subject and a predicate. So this is going to be the structure that you're going to have, the basic structure that you're going to have for every type of embedded clause when you have an embedded clause that is occurring as a complement to the verb. So in other words, you have a main verb like say, think, remember, claim, scream, any of those verbs that typically have to do with how you're saying something, expressing something, or how you're thinking about something. Those are the types that can take embedded clauses as complements. When they do, you're always just going to do exactly the same thing for them that you do for main clauses. You look at those in isolation. The embedded clause part, provide its full structure, and then just add it in as a complement to the verb. So, in other words, John was nice is just sitting in the regular complement position. If you had a direct object here, it would be in that same position. If you had an indirect object, object predicative, any of those complements, those would be in exactly the same position. So notice that in English, it's interesting that you can have the possibility of saying Mary said John was nice, but you also have the possibility to say Mary said that John was nice. And if you think about what is the difference in meaning between Mary said John was nice and Mary said that John was nice, it's pretty hard to come up with a description of how these two sentences are different from each other. And in fact, we think that they basically are expressing the same thing. Semantically, they're identical. But in English, for whatever reason, we get to have two different ways of expressing the embedded clause. You can either have that word that at the front of the embedded clause, or you can leave it out. So Mary said John was nice. That sounds like a fine sentence. Or Mary said that John was nice. That's also a fine sentence. Depending upon your mood, you might say it one way, you might say it the other way. It doesn't have any difference in meaning. Now notice that English is different from most languages of the world in this sense, because most languages of the world, if you do have what we call a complementizer, a word like that, at the beginning of an embedded clause, you have to have it. So in other words, if you translate this into another language, most often you're going to find that there's a word, Mary said that John was nice, and you have to have that word present in order to have the embedded clause. It's not okay to just leave it up. So if you check in the languages that you're familiar with, that you're native speakers of, so to think about the translation of Mary said John was nice, typically you're going to see that there's a word there that is functioning as a complementizer that has to occur at the beginning of the embedded clause. So this is something kind of weird about English. You can either have it or not have it. But since we can have it, we want to know what do we do with it when we do have it. So we want to just add Mary said that John was nice. And we don't know what we're going to do with the structure of this stuff up here. Okay. John was nice is exactly the same as it was before, right? It's still a sentence. You can still say John was nice as an independent sentence. Notice that You can't walk up to someone on the street and say that John was nice. That's just a really weird way to start a discourse because that is a marker of an embedded clause. So the word that is what we call a complementizer. And the function of the word that is to say whatever is occurring after me is an embedded clause. Whatever's coming up right now is an embedded clause. So it marks an embedded clause. Okay, so then why is it weird to start a conversation with someone and say that Mary is really nice? It sounds like you stopped in the middle of saying a sentence and you just gave the last part, right? So why can't we do that? Because that is a complementizer and it's telling us whatever occurring after me is an embedded clause. But when you just have the sentence that Mary is nice, there is nothing else there. That is the main clause, that Mary is nice. So in English, in general, you can't have main clauses that have complementizers present. Excuse me. And that's another way that English differs from many other languages. In many languages, you can have, at the beginning of a main clause, the complementizer present, and it will have a particular meaning. However, we're just thinking about English. So we want to know, Mary said that John was nice. What are we going to do with this complementizer that? So the first thing that we're going to do is label it. We can put this label here so that we know what's going on. We know that said is still the verb group of the main clause. And then the question is, where does the complementizer that go? Does it fit in with the verb group, said, or does it fit in with the embedded clause, John was nice? And if you think about it, the function of the complementizer is to introduce an embedded clause. So in other words, the complementizer is there because you have an embedded clause following the complementizer. So in other words, that is present here only because John was nice is present here. It's not present here because the verb said is here. Because you could have had the sentence, Mary said hello, and that would have been a fine sentence. So the complementizer doesn't depend on the verb, it depends on the embedded clause that occurs after. So for example, if you said Mary said that hello, that's not going to work because that says I'm now introducing an embedded sentence, a whole clause has to follow me, and hello is not a whole clause. So the idea is that that seems like it's dependent on the embedded clause itself. And therefore, we want to think that that is part of the structure of the embedded clause. And so the idea is that we're going to have another level of structure which we're going to call S-bar. So what is S-bar? S-bar is exactly identical to the sentence level that we're familiar with, but it's just a sentence with a complementizer in addition to the sentence. So S-bar is always going to be made up of complementizer plus a sentence. And in English, the most common complementizer is the complementizer that. So what is going to be now the complement to the verb group said? What is the thing that is said? It's this whole piece of material that's occurring after it, that John was nice, right? Because we have created a more complex embedded clause by having not just the sentence John was nice, but by adding in this that that's introducing the John was nice part. So, in other words, this guy is going to form a unit. What is the verb group plus as bar going to be? It's going to be exactly what it always is, a verb phrase. So in other words, once you form an embedded clause when you have the clause serving as the complement to the main verb, you always end up with exactly the structure that you have when you have the main verb taking any complement, whether it's a direct object, an indirect object, whatever. It's always leading to a verb phrase. So in this instance, when you have the complementizer that, the only difference is that you're going to have this S-bar structure. And then you're going to have that leading to VP, and Mary, the subject of the whole main clause, is going to take as its predicate said that John was nice. So this is going to be the structure that you'll have in every instance in which you have a main verb taking an embedded clause and where you have an overt complementizer. By overt complementizer, we mean the word that. So if we think about other instances that have a similar structure, another instance in which you have a main verb that can take not only just a direct object or an indirect object or an object predicative, but it can take itself a whole sentence as its complement. So, Harry shouted that Melissa was ill. Notice that in our embedded clauses, there are no restrictions on what type of material you can have there. So an embedded clause is exactly like a main clause in the sense that, for example, here you have Melissa was ill. You would know that what's going on here is that ill is a subject complement from Melissa, and you would have an intensive structure. However, you could have said, Harry shouted that Melissa gave Frank the ball, and then that would no longer be intensive, it would be ditransitive, it would be a completely different structure. So keep in mind that an embedded clause is just a regular type of clause in the sense that it can be of any sort. So what are we doing here first? First step, when you have main and embedded clauses, is identify the main clause. And you know that the main clause is always a material that includes everything. So main clause is Harry shouted that Melissa was ill. And the next thing that you want to do, and the way that you're going to know that you're dealing with an embedded clause, is to see that part of your sentence could have occurred as a separate sentence. So when you say, Harry shouted that Melissa was ill could have itself been a main clause. You can, in a conversation, say, Melissa was ill, I feel so bad for her, blah, blah, blah. So, in other words, Melissa was ill is what we identify as our embedded clause. And notice that in this example, we happen to have the complementizer that. And we said the complementizer that is introducing an embedded clause to the structure. So the function that that plays is to say, following me is going to be a complement clause to the verb. So when we think about what that is doing, that is functioning as a part of this embedded clause. And we said that we think that Melissa was ill, that whole structure as being what we call this S bar. So the S bar is a sentence plus the complementizer. Think of it as being the sentence, and in addition to that sentence, the complementizer. We don't want to say that the complementizer is part of the subject of this sentence, because if you say Harry shouted that Melissa was ill, the subject of this sentence is not that Melissa, right? That doesn't make sense. It's just that really doesn't carry any independent meaning in the sentence. It's just saying, I have a sentence following me. So let's see how we're going to provide the structure for the sentence. You're going to first look at the structure of the embedded clause, and it's identical. So just pretend that it's the main clause. Do exactly the same structure that you would do for any main clause. So you have Melissa was ill. You're going to provide noun, phrase, subject with Melissa. The predicate of the sentence is was ill. And at this point, you don't need to worry about what type of predicate do I have here, what are the tenses, do I have any modals. At this point, you're just going to be thinking about the subject and the predicate of the sentence. So when I am asking you for an identification of the different elements of the verb group, so for example, do you have a past, modal, perfect, passive, something like that, that will be the section that doesn't include embedded clauses. It's going to be separate, okay? So Melissa was ill is a regular sentence. It's a perfectly fine normal sentence comprised of a subject and a predicate. And then we have this word that we identified as a complementizer. And the idea of this is that it's telling us that coming up is an embedded clause. And we said that it seems to form part of this embedded clause. So we gave this new notation of S bar to express that the complementizer plus the embedded clause is this new S bar structure. And shouted, of course, is the verb group that takes that Melissa was ill, that whole structure, as its complement. So just like usual, whenever we have a verb group that is taking any type of complement, whether it's direct object, indirect object, etc., you'll always have two branching levels leading up to the VP. That is the predicate of the sentence. So, since we have a predicate, we have to have our noun phrase subject for the whole main clause, which of course is Harry, who's the one doing the saying. And therefore, Harry shouted that Melissa was ill is going to have this complete structure. So we're going to look at a few more examples where we have main verbs taking embedded clauses, and then we're going to see that it's possible to have other things besides main verbs taking embedded clauses, and see what those types of structures are going to look like.